Hello and welcome. This is my second video in the series about my birthplace, that is Sattari. What am I going to talk about in this second video? I'm just going to talk in simple words and as less time as possible about life in Sattari in the 60s. So I'll answer in simple words the basic question: how was life in Sattari in 1960s? Now I had already made a Marathi video on this, and after that recently I saw a Facebook post by a senior friend, meaning who is older than me, from Kerala, and his words I liked and they match almost to the situation what I am going to talk today. He said, I was neither rich nor poor when I was a child. I had all that I needed. Yes, that's in minimum words is what was Sattari. Sattari had all that was needed. Oh wow, you would say. All that was needed you had. We can't have it even today. But the situation was not plentiful or anything like that. The simple thing in those days in 1960s was that the needs were very, very, very less. So what did we have? So if we have to talk in terms of needs, we have to talk about the basic needs of a human: food, clothing, shelter. These are the three needs. Then I would add transportation, land ownership, and money. And I'm going to talk about them in minimum words. So first let us talk about food. In terms of food, Sattari was self-sufficient, meaning it was Atmanirbhar. After I posted the video in Marathi, there were some doubts that Goa was not self-sufficient, Goa didn't have sufficient food, and rice had to be imported, rice was sometimes not available. Then I did some research, on census, then on the trade at that time. I found that Sattari was different from Goa. So let me not go into the details now. And I've also talked to some friends of older than me. Sattari was different from rest of the Goa because of the population and what crops grew there. So the food, the basic necessity for a person to live is food. And what is sufficient? The minimum sufficient food is just that time was just if you had rice, if you had water, and if you had fire. Which means if you had a chool, what they call a fireplace where you cook, you had wood for burning, and you had rice, water was obviously there, and that was the basic minimum food that was required. And that was not fully sufficient, but there were other natural resources. The most important natural food was jackfruit. You would say, what is jackfruit? We just eat jackfruit casually. But jackfruit was a major important food during that time. This is what my cousin also said, older than me, whom I just talked to recently. Jackfruit has got lot of carbohydrates as compared to any other fruit, and we had methods to preserve jackfruit by salting in brine. So it could be preserved over a period of time, and during the jackfruit season we ate a lot of jackfruit. Other than that, during rainy season there were homegrown vegetables, cucumbers, ridge gourds. Cucumbers could also be preserved, or ripe cucumber, if you keep it, can last 5-6 months. So, and then there were many other vegetables and food items. So the food was not a problem because rice grew in Sattari, and there was a sufficient land for rice. And I'm going to come about the rice ownership of the fields later. Now the next thing is clothing. Wow, not wow. Clothing is wow today, and we have unnecessary amount of clothing today. That time we didn't even have necessary amount of clothing, meaning clothing was minimal. We had just one half pant, banyan was not there. Ladies would get 2 saris in a year, and saris only required a blouse. Those type of saris at that time didn't require anything else. Gents would wear a pancha, or what they call as a short dhoti, and that's it. Now after clothing, we come to shelter. Shelter was surprisingly, as compared to today, was easy because land was not a problem. There were two types of land ownerships about the houses. There was one thing called as Gauthan, or the village area, where anybody could build a house, and mostly the working caste, that is the Kulwadis, would build their houses there. Once they build a house there, that land became theirs, and they would also have a coconut tree besides that. So that also added to the food. And the other caste, that is Brahmins, were having houses in their own land. Now, building a house was not that difficult because a clay house was built manually by working. So many people would build their own house or with labor, and the only item that needed to be bought was the tiles on top. The other woodwork items were available from the jungle, or they could be sewn from timber. So that's about food, clothing and shelter. Now the transportation. Transportation was very, very less. I'm going to talk in detail about transportation much later. But the basic need was met by a bus, meaning most of the places had bus up to a certain point. We had a bus going from our village to Panjim once in a day. It would go once in the morning and come back once in the evening. Now, there are certain parts of Sattari where buses or road transport could not go because of the river. So that I'm going to talk in the next session, how Sattari was divided by the river itself. So there you had to use a canoe or a small hodi or boat they call, to cross the river. And substantial areas of Sattari were accessible only by walking, because there was some roads were there, or some places there were no roads. There was no ready-made transport. Nobody owned any vehicle except maybe some few people had cycle, and you had to walk. Now to the land ownership. The land ownership was mostly with Brahmins, but the land was owned also by Gaonkars, or I came to know more, read about it more recently. Gaonkar actually meant a collective land ownership. So the Brahmins owned land as well as the Gaonkars owned land. So who didn't own the land? The land was not owned by people who migrated, which is something happens even today. You migrate to some other place and you can't own a land there. So those were also known. Now I came to know after thinking about it that the migrated people were known by their name directly. The Kulwadis had their surnames based on the Gaon. The people who were originally from that village were called as Gaonkars. And people who was coming from some other place, they were named after their village. Like for example, my neighbor was named as Harwalkar. Then another neighbor named as Usapkar. Then another neighbor was named as Pariyekar, and things like that. So they came from those villages. That's why the name came to them. And now what did these people do? These people mostly became a bhageri. Bhageri means someone who works parallelly with you, with the landowner, and shares the crop. So in terms of land ownership, they would be a bhageri. So you would have land to cultivate either as a owner or as a bhageri. So you get half the crop. So because of this, most of the people, and the rice paddy cultivation available, most of the people had food. So this is basically about land ownership. Yes, I forgot most important thing about food. There was plenty of jungles, and there was good amount of grass in rainy season, and the same paddy rice, when it is harvested, that hay was available throughout the year. So because of that, almost everyone had cattle. Every person in the village had cattle, maybe exception of 10% or whatever. So because of the cattle, we had good amount of milk, and milk was most likely during at least in my childhood, I don't remember milk being sold or something like that. Dairies came later. So we had the milk as one important factor of food. So in food, there was rice, milk, and obviously people who eat non-veg, they ate fish. But fish was not so common in Sattari because sea was not near. They would fish in some ponds and rivers, but that was not everyday thing. And then jackfruit. So with this I end the basic how was life session in Sattari in the 1960s. I hope you like it and you hear my previous and later videos. Thank you.